let's start off with this. A lot of people have different interpretations of the Second Amendment.
Right.
For example, it was only for the militia.
Right.
Was it only for a militia exclusively, or what constitutes?
Back up to the philosophy. The philosophy was every human has a certain set of natural rights.
Right.
And those natural rights are what you find throughout nature. So when you get into nature, three things you'll find. If you start messing with an animal, they will defend their lives, they will defend their family, and they will defend their property. And I don't care if it's a horse or a dog or a cat or a mountain lion or a bear. So there is a natural right of self-defense. From that, they said, okay, every individual has the right, a God-given natural right to defend yourself. That's something government can't regulate. And by the way, you can defend yourself individually or you can defend yourself corporately. Here's a great book. This early book, this is from Virginia. This is the laws they had in 1819. And it says, if you're 16 all the way up to 45, you're the militia. Every city, every town, every community, 16 to 45, you're that militia. Right. So that's how informal the organization was. But the law says...
Were women included?
Women were often included, but not in the law.
Okay.
It was people 16 to 45, but women, it was real common to have women with arms. And in the Revolution, that was not an unusual thing for women to carry arms. So that was pretty much, they would do that.
These are not rights given by government, they're just recognized.
They're recognized by government, they're to be protected by government, what the Declaration says. And so that right to self-defense can be individually or it can be as a herd of elk. So I can corporately get all my neighbors together to defend something, or I can say, I'll take care of it myself. I got this. So that's what the Second Amendment does. It has an individual part and it has a corporate part. I have the individual right to self-defense and I have a corporate right of self-defense. And the recognition was, we don't care where the danger comes from. It might come from our own government, which is what happened back then. It might come from gangs in the neighborhood. It might come from a crazy neighbor or a crazy uncle. So whether it's me or all of us, we've got a right to individually and to corporately do it. And that's why it's interesting. They had no limitations really on what you could use to defend you. Matter of fact, one of the fun stories of the American Revolution is a guy named Samuel Whitmore. And what happened was, the first battle of the Revolution is Lexington, the second is Concord. And so after the British have been hit at Lexington and at Concord, they start marching back to Boston. And as they're doing so, they're just shooting Americans along the way. There were 4,500 Americans lined up along the road on the way back to Boston shooting at them, and they're just taking everything out. So the word goes ahead of the British, 700, 800 British coming, you guys clear your houses because they're just taking people down. Old man, 80 years old, Samuel, he said, well, not my house. So he goes inside, he gets his musket, he charges it, primes it, loads it. He gets 2 pistols, primes it, loads it. He sticks a sword in his belt. He walks outside, sees 800 British coming at him, ups with his musket, shoots one, drops it, ups with 2 pistols, shoots them.
Okay, so now we're left with 797.
No, that's right.
Still seems like a problem.
It is a problem. He goes 2 more, he kills 2 more with his pistols. 80-year-old guy, he pulls his sword out and charges the British, one guy going at him. So they have lost 3 of their comrades right there on the front line. They promptly up and shoot him right in the face, square in the face. And of course he hits the ground, that's it. They stand over him, bayonet him 13 times. Then they took the butt of the rifle and just cracked his skull, crushed his skull. They keep moving. We've shown you don't want to mess with us. The neighbors heard the shooting over at old man Whitmore's house and then came to look. And when they got there, he's lying there in a pool of blood, reloading his guns to get another shot off as the British were leaving. He lived another 18 years.
After they butted him in the face and bayoneted him 13 times?
13 times. And shot him in the face, butted him in the face. He lived in there 18 years. There's a great tombstone to him there, 98 years old. He finally dies after having been... So you didn't get rid of your guns. I mean, there was no point in life...
Or Whitmore.
Well, yeah, that's right.
He's like the candy man. You say his name 3 times in the mirror, he's still liable to show.
Oh, it could be. He could live forever. On the other end, you got John Quincy Adams, when he's 8 years old, is with the Massachusetts Minutemen, performs all the drills, does all the musket stuff. So Lexington Green, all that stuff, he's out at 8 years old getting ready for all of that. So whether you're 8 or whether you're 80 or 98, doesn't matter.
So that kind of brings us to the next question. You hear this quite a bit. Everything you've just talked about, muskets or single-shot pistols. A lot of people say if the Second Amendment were written today, it would be different because they didn't take into account, for example, firearms that might have had higher capacity or were more effective. Do you have any answers for those folks?
Yeah, you remember they had 10-shot muskets. Remember the muskets they used back then?
Yeah.
Not quite.
Well, no, I remember they also had the pepper box revolver, right?
They did.
The puckle gun, the Girandoni air rifle.
See, the deal was you have a right to defend yourself.
Right.
Whatever, you have a right. So the biggest weapon in that day would have been a cannon.
Yes.
Hands down, cannon. You're allowed as a citizen to own cannons.
Yes, that was the letter of Markham Reprisal to, was it from
Well, you have Madison, you have all the, as a matter of fact,
yeah, was it Madison?
well, when you go back in state laws provide for it. So the founding fathers talked about it because now what they did was said, hey, don't set your cannon off within a mile of town. We're tired of town getting blown up.
Right.
You know, but you can have a cannon. Whatever the government had, you could have.
Right.
And that was the belief, because we might have to take on the government someday. We hope that never happens, but in case it does, we defend ourselves from anything that comes after us, whether it's from foreign or domestic, whether it's a gang, whether it's a government, whether it's, again, a crazy uncle.
Right.
We don't care. So for them, there was no limitation on what you could use or how you could defend yourself. So what you get is this musket, nice little 78 caliber smooth bore.
Yep.
So you see how large it is. We're not going to prime it and set it off, but what you would do, you cock it back, and by the way, just for grins, there's two positions on this. That's half cocked.
Okay.
I pull the trigger, it's not going to go off. It looks like it's ready to fire. This is where you get don't go off half cocked. So this is what you would have said to them. Don't go off half cocked because it's not going to fire.
Okay.
If I get all the way back, now what I've done is I've poured powder down here out of a powder.
Was that sort of like a safety mechanism?
Yes, while you're loading.
Yeah.
And what happens is it's not going to fall and create a spark and set it off. So you pull it back there while you're loading up with powder. So what you start, powder here, then you drop a 78 caliber ball on it, then you put wadding in, cram it down so that when you go up, it's not going to roll out the end. Then you go right here and you load this with powder. There's a little hole that goes inside. You put this down on top. Now you do a full cock, and when I shoot this thing, watch the sparks.
Wow.
So the sparks set the fire, that goes inside, burns that explodes, it goes out the end. And so you got to do this now it takes you 15 to 20 seconds to reload every time you shoot this thing.
Yeah, that sounds
So it takes a while, which the problem is, your kill range effectively is going to be 30 to 40 yards. And if it takes you 15, 20 seconds, man, a big old NFL lineman can cover 40 yards in 6 seconds.
Right.
So you're in trouble, which is why you then use the bayonets that went with these. So now here's the other kind of fun part. How tall are you?
Well, with the hat, about 6'9". Without it, I'm about 6'2".
You're 6'2". All right, George Washington was about 6'2 3/4".
Okay.
So you're about the height of Washington. He was exceptionally tall. He was considered to be head and shoulders above his troops.
Right.
So the average troop is about right here. You're talking 5'1" to 5'4".
Yeah.
You're
Unless you
below
count the
gun
French
level.
reinforcements, and they're about 4'6".
That's
yeah.
right, real small.
Yeah.
Thin guys.
But thank you for helping us out, French. Good on you. Yeah.
You know, and that is one time they got to win something. You know?
yes, they did.
They got with the Americans and got to win
Good
something.
point.
So this is what they would have done. So imagine a short guy like this having to carry this and deal with this, go 40, 50, 60 miles a day in a wool uniform, carry all your stuff with you. These were tough guys, and they ate 2 meals a day.
Yeah.
So they're tough guys, but this is individually, and every single 16 through 45-year-old was required by law to have one of these, have all the stuff that went with it, have enough ball and powder to shoot and do
Now,
some
is this
damage.
only if they were actively enrolled in the military?
No,
or
if you're a citizen.
Right.
If you're a citizen.
And that's
Matter
similar
of
to what they
fact,
do in Switzerland.
We're still Second Amendment here.
Okay.
And this is from a great feminist, except you don't know her that way today. Says Annie Oakley.
Here, you
right
mind turning
there.
around so we can see here? Because
Got
you're
it.
covering it with your wonderful...
Says Annie Oakley right there, so people know who Annie Oakley is. She was a sharpshooter, and she started shooting when she was about 9 years old. By the time she was 15, she had made so much money shooting game and selling it to meat markets that she paid off the family mortgage. She was an orphan.
And when was this?
This would have been, man, she was 9 years old.
She wasn't an orphan. She always had a mom. Her mom got married.
That's right.
Okay.
She was without a father
Okay.
for a period of time, but not an orphan. That's right. She had a mom. That's right.
But what period in time would this have been?
This would have been
60s.
in 1860s.
1860s, okay.
1860s, because she became really famous on the Buffalo Bill Wild West.
Yeah.
And so this was the kind of stuff she would do. She would shoot shotguns, pistols, rifles, right hand, left hand, and she was a sharpshooter.
What made her a feminist?
Well, what made her a feminist was she advocated for all sorts of women's rights. But you don't hear that today, because the one right she said especially, here's what makes men and women equal, the gun.
Right.
If a woman can handle a gun as well as she handles a baby, there is not going to be inequality.
Right.
And so that doesn't line up with modern feminism, but she was the first female superstar in a male's world.
Right.
And I mean, what she did, these are targets that she would use. In one particular setting, her husband Frank, they had a launcher. It's kind of like a skeet thrower, but it would throw these, and he threw 5,000 of these out, and with a rifle, not a shotgun, with a rifle, she shot 4,772 of these.
It seems needlessly ornate.
Well,
I mean, they could just throw out like
Here's the
just a
contribution
clay
of the
ball.
French.
Look at this. That's like a Christmas ornament that you pay a premium for at World Market.
This, when it blew up in front of a crowd, you could really see it blow up.
Okay.
And so this is what they would use in a lot of the shows. And by the way, these were made by the French. So there's a contribution of the French
There
for
you
you.
go.
So they made something we could
Okay.
shoot. So she was actually on a tour of Europe in front of the Queen. This is actually a coin with the Queen's face on it that throw in the air, and she would take and shoot through it. So you see the hole through the middle of it. We have a number of these, not Annie Oakley, but these are called gallery guns.
Okay.
And the reason they are is that carnivals, all the way through the 1930s and 40s, you would pay a nickel and get 5 shots, and kids, this is what they would shoot. It was a .22 at the shooting gallery,
Right.
at the carnival. So kids are doing this all the time, and there's no big deal over it. We don't think that's a big
I'm sure there were a few accidents.
well, there probably were, but they were very rare. And looking at the founding era, I've only found 2 gun accidents at all in that era. And Jefferson told his 15-year-old, he said, "You take a gun with you everywhere you go. That's one of the best forms of exercise you can have." John Quincy Adams, his 10-year-olds, he says, "I want them with guns, I want pistols and rifles." And so they train, because as John Quincy Adams explained, the more familiar you are, the less accidents you have.
Right. Clearly, if you go through the historical documents, it's meant for more than just muskets, right? So that's
Right.
put to bed. Everyone was
Right.
constituted the militia. And now you've showed us these different examples of people who were very comfortable in firing firearms in the schools up until the 70s. When did this sort of phobia of firearms happen? Because the entire time that I've been alive, it's not been that kind of a scenario. We've always been told that, don't touch a firearm, don't go near it, let a parent know, stay away from it.
You'll see a massive change in the value system in the 60s and the 70s. We started saying, don't tell me what's right and wrong, and you can't tell me what's right and wrong, and we can't let, in 1980, the Supreme Court said, you can't let kids see the 10 Commandments. If they saw something like don't steal and don't kill, they might obey it. So, I mean, we're even at the point where we're taking down what was in courthouses because there's moral values attached to it. With that becomes an increase in lack of self-control. Behavior goes the wrong direction, crime starts rising, and our answer is don't deal with the thinking process, let's take it out of your hands.
Yeah.
And that's a crazy thing to do. I mean, for me as a Christian, I'll go back to Cain and Abel. They didn't have guns, so what did Cain do? He picked up a rock and clubbed his brother Abel. So we need rock control laws that would stop it.
What would you say is the biggest misconception, the number one thing that people get wrong about the Second Amendment?
It is none of the government's business. It is an inalienable right given us by God. Government can recognize it, it cannot regulate it. And so that's the biggest conception. Go back to the Declaration, read those first 126 words. It says forth the 5 principles of government. There is a God. He gives you a certain set of rights. Those are inalienable rights. Government must protect them, and then past that, you get the right to consent of the governed. So our decision to choose whether we want gun control laws, that's not our choice. We have the right, it's a natural right to defend ourselves. I'd say that's the biggest misconception, is that government has a right to regulate. It doesn't have a right to regulate our free speech. It doesn't have a right to regulate our private property. Those are all inalienable rights. I think that's the biggest misconception. We think we've allowed government to have a role it should never have had, and that it didn't have.